Rants, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg, and your Colonial Champion, Sean McCoy. Welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast!
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, to the Court-Martail Podcast. I am your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty, and you're probably wondering why you're getting a podcast not 2 days after we just released a podcast with Skylar's Trivia. And the reason for this is I wanted to release a couple of more podcasts this week, not only in preparation for WrestleMania 42, but because my OCD brain wanted to round out the 100s of the Court-Martail Podcast episodes before we got to WrestleMania 42. And so WrestleMania 42, as this is episode 197, I believe, I'm going to be releasing episode 198 probably on Friday, and then on Monday, we are going to be reviewing the entirety of WrestleMania 42, and that will be when we record it. So more than likely, WrestleMania episode 199 will be WrestleMania Saturday. That's going to be released on Tuesday of that week, and then the Wednesday afterwards, that's going to be day 2. Or if I'm actually on my game as far as editing is concerned, and the Colonial editor can get his stuff together, then we will actually try to release both WrestleMania Saturday and WrestleMania Sunday on the same day. Now, our sister station, TAW Gaming, is going to have the full, unedited, raw, uncut, girthy edition, including all of the cuts and transitions. They're all going to be all in there. Because for most of the pay-per-view reviews, and I'm not saying this is a knock or a criticism because he does such an amazing editing job with everything else he does, he kind of takes it easy on the podcast ones. He's like, here's a thumbnail, enjoy your thumbnail. If somebody says something controversial, I might throw something in, but otherwise, just enjoy the ride. And I respect that because that's the way that I did, but I like breaking it up myself. So we're going to try and do 199, and episode 200 will be WrestleMania 42 Sunday's review. Episode 198 that you're going to hear on Friday, that's going to be the preview, so to speak, where I am going to give some reactions, I'm going to give some previews, and I'm going to talk about what my thoughts are heading into this WrestleMania in arguably the strangest position I have ever been when it comes to my opinions about professional wrestling, when it comes to my passion about professional wrestling. So we're going to review all of that on Friday, but now let's get to what we're doing today, because I'm going to be here by myself just talking to you, the Court-Martail Podcast loyal listeners who have been here for so long, and I really appreciate you being here every step of the way. It's actually pretty remarkable when you think about it that this show is almost 10 years old from the first episode being aired, but realistically speaking, more like 5 or 6 years ago when in 2020 when we rebooted this for the Royal Rumble. So it's going to be kind of like that time, but I've got a few things I want to talk about just not related to wrestling before I get into what I do want to talk about, which is 10 years ago, the very first Court-Martail Podcast episode, or the prototype of that episode, aired. And I want to examine what that video is and whether those 5 easy fixes I pitched for WWE have been applied, or whether we can reapply them to today's WWE. But the first thing I'm going to get out of the way is, if you've heard me multiple times before, you could probably hear I've got a little bit of a nasal congestion, and that is because there is a nasty sickness going around everywhere. My mom is really sick. It started in the lungs and then went up to the chest, and then it's like it turns into a headache and then like head congestion. It's not fun. And I have a little bit of it, and it's been kind of coming and going, but the ironic thing is, on Monday, Thursday, 3 days before Easter, I got poison ivy really, really bad. And I'm actually going to have the editor put a photo of my swelled up eye. It looks like somebody gave me a shiner, as that is what I looked like on Saturday morning, to the point where I said I need to go to the doctor. So I got to the doctor and went to the walk-in clinic, and they gave me some prednisone. Now, I'd never taken it before. And this prednisone worked wonders. It stopped all the itch, all the rash is basically gone. But I didn't realize that with antibiotics like that, you have to actually like run the table in the way that they prescribe it to you. So for the one I had to take, it was take 5 a day for 3 days, then 4 a day for 3 days, then 3 a day for 3 days, then 2 a day for 3 days, and then 1 a day for 3 days. So I'm not even done taking the pills, even though the rash has long subsided. But you have to run it out, otherwise the antibiotics don't work. But here's the interesting thing about that is that once this sickness came around, which I'm pretty positive I got from teaching a bunch of 5th and 6th graders about opera, as for those of you who are loyal listeners know that I have a background in opera. I actually work for an opera company up here in Connecticut called Saltmarsh Opera, and I'm on the circuit going to schools because all these kids are going to come and see our spring production, Cinderella. So I'm one of the multiple teachers that Saltmarsh has hired to go and explain what opera is and everything that's going on in Cinderella and how the show is going to be a little bit more transformed and what they can expect. It's 5th and 6th graders, but they were pretty attentive. But I was in a cafeteria with 60 disease-spreading children, and that's not a knock on children. Quite unlike Bray Wyatt, I guess it's not unlike Bray Wyatt. I guess they'd be quite like Bray Wyatt in SCCG. I love the children. And actually, they were very cool and respectful, and they, the longer I went, the more hands went up, so they were really engaged, which was nice. Not the point. The point is I got sick because I was in a room full of 60 kids, and there is no place where sicknesses travel faster than in schools. That's just the facts of life. And so I'm pretty sure I got it from that. But the antibiotics that I'm taking for the poison ivy are actually softening the blow of the sickness. It's like, it's almost like that BoJack Horseman joke of like, what are you doing here? And the prednisone's like, no, what are you doing here? So it's a very interesting battle between the prednisone and all of the herb that I partake in and this sickness all fighting for the love and affection of my lungs. And I actually think the prednisone and the herb is winning. So that's kind of the way. That's why I sound like I'm a little bit more nasally than I normally am. And, now I would just want to get into a couple of things that are annoying me lately. Because I don't really have a place to vent these things, but one of these things has just gotten me to the point where I am just so done. I'm just so done. I am tired of this perpetuating. There needs to be some sort of conference about this because it has gotten so out of hand, quite literally. Something that's really been pissing me off lately is chip bags that you cannot open in the middle. You know, the ones that you have to like tear the corner of, like they give you the little rip, like you have to tear it vertically. Stop doing this. I am telling the entirety of all of the marketing for any chip product, whether it's Kellogg's or Frito-Lay or Frito-Yay, or I say Frito-Nay. Because every time that you open a bag in the center, it's so psychologically satisfying just to have that double pincer to open up and then you go, it's nice. And then you get a big whiff of whatever it is you're about to eat. And then your testicles get 3 times their size that day because you're just so embiggened by the scent of what you are about to partake in. And your heart is screaming, no, please don't. It's going to give me a heart attack, but you don't care because it's going to be tasty. Unless that experience is ruined by these little guys and these little bags, and sometimes they're big bags, but most of the times they're little bags or they're tortilla bags or they're the health food bags. And how dare you charge us $6 for health food bags and then not give us convenience of opening the bag? That is just mean shit right there. And then you tear open the corner, right? And either you tear it and it opens up to like 0.23 millimeters, and so you have to just get a pair of scissors and cut it open the middle anyway. Or it tears 3/4 of the way down the bag so you can never seal it properly again. And you have to basically turn it into like a taco and roll up the taco and try to put a rubber band or a clip on it. Or eat the whole bag, which is not something I always want to do. I do it a lot, but it's not something I always want to do. And I'm just getting really sick of this being a persistent way of opening chips. This is not necessary. We have all of these options. This should be a unilateral thing. There needs to be a law put in place. You have to open it from the middle. You're going to prevent all these spills from taking place. Secondly, the worst part is, let's say you get the sweet spot. You get that sweet spot and you tear it and it's perfect and you got exactly the hand size and you stick your hand in, and the second that you open from that claw, the entire bag rips in half. And it's spilled all the way down, and now you've got to pull your one, or you get one chip, or you can't even get that one chip because the hand size is big enough, but it's not big enough for the chip, so you have to break the chip in order to get the chip out of the bag. I'm telling you, I am looking all of you right in the eye when I say this. Every single mega corporation that manufactures chips, get on the same page, open it through the middle, and enough of this nonsense. I have had enough. And another thing that's pissing me off, and this one, every case is different for this, because I know that there's just a certain amount of drivers, and I know people don't want to hear me bitching about traffic here on this podcast, but I gotta say this. When you were pulling up to a left turn, right? Let's say you got that light and you don't, or maybe you do have the green, the green light and the turn signal to turn left, right? And you only have a certain amount of time before that green arrow turns red, and then the people from the other side are able to go. What I cannot understand is when that light turns green or when that light is yellow, whoever is in the first of the line apparently has been having the most comatose nap of their lives, so that they then go slower than snails on the top of turtles. And I swear, and that makes it so that it's a yellow, right? And then it turns red, and then you have to make a decision, because if you're right behind this person who has gone 1 mile an hour to make this turn that used every single second of that green arrow, do you then just vault it into the stratosphere and pull in right behind and just hug this person's ass until you can get there on the other side and hope you don't get hit? Or do you sit there and wait for all the mass amount of traffic, wait in the exact center of the road until their light turns red and the other side's light turns green and hope you don't get hit by them, and then make that turn? And all I want is just a little hitch in the giddy up. And you know what I think the problem is? It's not really that people aren't paying attention because they're like daft. People aren't paying attention because they're answering texts while they're waiting for the light to turn green, and they're not getting the reaction time necessary to see when the light turns green, and then they either go too fast or they're 100. And there's some vehicles that I understand cannot avoid this, right? If you are a vehicle that requires a CDL, obviously you can only go so fast. There's only so much those trucks are able to do. I used to drive dump trucks for both a landscaping company and a garden center when I would be delivering plants and whatnot. And those trucks, I don't care how hard you slam that gas pedal onto the floor of that truck is not going faster than maybe 35 to 45 by the time you get to the highway, when you're on an on-ramp. And then you're basically just staying in the right lane and letting everybody pass you, and you could sit there and God forbid if you have air brakes, then you really got to be careful. And I mean, some of the ones that, I was driving one from like the 90s, but even still, there are some of those trucks, they don't have the velocity and the acceleration necessary to make those kind of turns. And that's not who I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the guy in the Volkswagen Jetta or in the tricked out Honda Civic who has got spoilers on I do not understand the obsession with tuning up Honda Civics. Hondas are cool, but they're not that cool. They're, and I'm somebody who I would probably get one. My buddy Abizzle, who's been on this show before, he loves Honda Civics. I'm not saying anything about them specifically, but I don't get the people who are obsessed with tuners choosing a Honda Civic. It seems like the most basic bitch's car you could possibly trick out with spoilers and loud exhaust and whatever the fuck else you put into that aftermarket bullshit. But in any case, it's these people who then are at this light and go so insanely slow. Or in where I'm from, it's the, It's the white Volvo. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like the station wagon Volvo. It's not a van, but it's, I don't know, everyone and actually there's a specific demographic from where I am that has these white Volvos. It is middle-aged blonde, straight women who have kids, usually in their teens. And I know this because I not only dated one, but I also have seen this same person or the same type of person get into white bubbles. And when I say they're everywhere in my town, I swear there are at least 5 or 6 different license plates I recognize. All of this same white Volvo. It is ridiculous. But it's that. Just you have the capability, you have the means. I just need a little bit more focus because, and I'm not even trying to rush, it's just hazardous to the people behind you because you're putting them in a position where you're risking them, or you just have to sit there and wait for the light to go back and forth another time, even though there's only one person in front of you, but that one person took up the entirety of the green light, so then you have to sit through an entire cycle of lights until you get that green arrow again. And I have had enough. All right, that's enough ranting for one day. Let's move on to something actually I've been enjoying, because as I'm going to discuss on the next episode when I do the WrestleMania 42 preview, I am the least enthused about professional wrestling than I've ever been, which is kind of sad, and that includes the 2022 Vince McMahon WrestleMania 38 era of wrestling, and it's shocking to me that we're at this point. And that's not to say I'm not interested in WrestleMania 42. I am, but there's a lot of other things that I've been dipping my toes into as I've kind of freed up my time from the wrestling world, except for CIW, of course, because Colonial Impact Wrestling is basically my one-stop shop for my wrestling fix now, admittedly, because I do enjoy making those shows very much. But one of the other things I've been enjoying doing is getting into Dungeons & Dragons. And now I'm a little bit different of a player than probably some of the hardliners of Dungeons & Dragons, mainly in that I really love improv. I like making things up on the go. Now, I don't leave everything up to destiny of what's going to happen at the moment, because I am trying to dip my toes into the DMing side of it as well. And I've been playing a few sessions with Abizzle, actually, as well as we have a separate D&D group that we occasionally meet. I've been friends with them for almost 4 years, and we've played maybe, or at least I've been at the table maybe 10 times total, because that's D&D. What is D&D without massive scheduling conflicts? But I've been really enjoying getting into that medium. Abizzle got me a whole mess of he got me a D&D starter kit, he got me a monster manual, and it's tapped into a level of fantasy that I do enjoy. I'm a big Skyrim fan. I do love playing that game a lot. And I've really enjoyed kind of creating my own lore. I'm building a campaign now. It's basically like a Jumanji tower where every floor is going to be a different world almost, but there's going to be a puzzle room and a boss room, and there's experience points, and there's all sorts of treasures and stuff. And I've really enjoyed getting into the storytelling aspects of that medium. And it makes me wonder if there's some way to converge the two, of whether there is some way to have a wrestling based Dungeons and Dragons campaign, because there would have to be overarching villain actually having a head shitting, would he be a sorcerer? Would Vince be a sorcerer? I don't know, because people used to say he would do the Jedi mind tree. He'd be a mind flayer. But Vince McMahon, the Draco Lich, as there could be a lot of ways that you could play around with that, as far as having some kind of an overarching villain and the whole themes of justice and getting vengeance and being wronged and getting heat and having that person get the comeuppance that they so deserve. That is exactly the kind of lore and storytelling that D&D loves to use as well. Even though they have a lot of different dimensions to it, there could be a level of overlap, and I almost wonder if there is a way to make a campaign where one of the baseline requirements is that all of the characters have to be unarmed. There's no weapons in the game except for enhanced gauntlets that might help you fight better, but it would all be based on the gauntlets instead of having swords and hand axes and morning stars, just all these be different hands, or the grips, or different tights, and that would allow you to do different things, and you'd be able to cast spells in a different way. And I think it'd be challenging to kind of translate over all of the aspects of wrestling into a D&D atmosphere. But I would rather do it that way than the other way around, because I think we get enough fantastical bullshit in professional wrestling as it is. Or at least, it's interesting because it's not as much as it used to be. Weirdly enough, it's not as much as it used to be. But, you don't see people using the Force as often. You have an occasional gimmick promotion, usually Evil Uno's, saying that John Cena's there and just having the Invisible Man show up. So that hasn't changed. But it's given me some pause to think of like what could be done for a wrestling D&D campaign that like culminates with fighting the big bad evil guy, the champion at WrestleMania or something along that lines. So maybe they all have to be monks, and then they come up, and then the storyline is, the big bad evil guy who's oppressing all of the talent. And, you can find ways to incorporate the backstage stuff, or in the case of the modern world, a higher power has descended and shoehorned themselves into your party for no reason because they're afraid that you're not making enough money. And that could be, the entire way that you go about it. So if anyone is actually involved in D&D and likes D&D, I'm going to try and do some stuff with that on the Knux OG channel. I haven't quite figured out what kind of D&D content I'm going to make yet, but we're going to figure it out and we're going to do it. And it may have to do with wrestling. It probably won't. But if you're into D&D and that's something that does have a level of overlap, I would be happy to share some of that with you, and go take a look at Knux OG. This was not meant to be a plug, but that is probably where that's going to wind up if I'm going to do anything with it at all. So stay tuned for that. And also check out all the gaming that I did. I'm just taking a break from it for the time being because I just needed a break. I did a big March where I got through the entirety of Wally, and I did a bunch of Pokemon, and quite frankly, it didn't draw the way that I was hoping it would. So I'm going to taking some time off that. So stay tuned for some more stuff with Knux OG. But let's move on to the main event, shall we? Well, if this audio sounds a little choppy, as I'm sure you can tell, I've been doing a little editing in between because I am still sick. So I'm trying not to blow my nose or sneeze or do any of that shit on camera out of respect for you. I'm not like my co-host, Skylar, who just peed in front of y'all, as I'm going to show a little bit more class than that, as Skylar will never let that down. Even though that's exactly what he did. He let it out, he whipped it out and let it all hang out. And I don't know whether his chain hangs low or wobbles to and fro, whether he could tie it in a knot or tie it in a bow or throw it over his shoulder. And I hope never to find that out. So, Skylar, I'm going to leave you to decide whether you want to reveal that to the public when you show up for a WrestleMania review, but that remains to be seen. Josh, again, is undoubtedly, well, you know what kind of energy he gives off, so he's got this, nah, I won't say it. He knows. He knows. But anyway, about 10 years ago, I released a video on Colonial Impact Wrestling called The Court-Martail Podcast, 5 Easy Fixes to Improve WWE. And I made this on January 6th, 2016. So this was pre-2016 Royal Rumble that I made this video. And for those of you who want to go back and take a look at it, you're welcome to. I don't think you're going to have to because I'm basically going to readdress these 5 fixes. But it's been 10 years now. And I thought it would be fun, considering that this Court-Martail podcast was effectively the first and is how this channel got its name and got its start, was with that. So I thought let's take a look at these 5 fixes, see whether they have done any of these things, whether they've improved on any of these points, and whether any of this can really be usable 10 years later. So first of all, the haircut here is absolutely abysmal. And, the thing is I was getting a good haircut, but I was still kind of gripping on, but I hated having that part in the middle. And I guess it wasn't really in the middle at that time, but I do miss having that physique, although I am a bit of a skinny bitch. The Quinnipiac Ballroom Society shirt, that was I went to school at Quinnipiac, so I was in college there, and that was Quinnipiac Ballroom Society was all about ballroom dancing, and that year, in 2016, I was actually teaching ballroom dance lessons for the entirety of that year, and that was my career for about 10 months or so. But that's the kind of the backdrop of what this is. It is, of course, in the Colonial Dungeon, which you have seen innumerable times. Every single Grapplies, you see the Colonial Dungeon. But I go on to say that these are 5 things that WWE could do to fix things up. Now, the context of 2016 and the context of 2026 are very different. Namely, Vince McMahon was he hadn't even gotten into the throngs of how bad things were going to get. He was at the halfway point. The deterioration hadn't gotten that bad at that point. But, we hadn't even gotten Goldberg returning yet to dominate Brock Lesnar. That hadn't even happened. So this whole situation started out, my point number 1 then was that WWE needed managers. And namely, I brought up the example of Roman Reigns because I even 10 years ago, I liked Roman Reigns. But he wasn't a mouthpiece. This was right after the whole Tater Tots promo, which I had forgotten until I went back and rewatched this video of who is he talking to? Dean Ambrose? Something, I don't even remember the line. I'm sure Josh again or Skylar could elucidate for me. But this was in a myriad of ones. I think Suffer and Succotash had already happened. I believe Roman Reigns already had that, I will win the Royal Rumble in that question marky kind of, in that tone. And it's interesting now looking at it because I mentioned Bobby Heenan and I even mentioned Paul Heyman for Roman Reigns. And little did we know, this is probably the one point that I made in this entire video that WWE not only did, but used the example that I used and made buckets of money on it. This was the one item in this entire thing I will take the victory lap on because Paul Heyman working with Roman Reigns ended up being one of the best things to happen to WWE in many, many, many years. And it's now interesting seeing how Roman Reigns is in yet another world title main event at WrestleMania, now having broken, I think, Hogan and John Cena's record. I think he now has the most. It's fascinating to me that all this would not have happened. It was all predicated on them needing managers. Now, the difficulty in 2026 is that, quite like 2016, there aren't many managers to speak of. Not really. I don't think that they really are training managers anymore. And it's a shame because I feel like it's such a lost art. But I also think it's difficult because the kind of crop of wrestlers and people who want to be wrestlers is different now. If I ever wanted to do something in the business, all I would ever really want to do is be a manager and use my mouth to advocate for somebody else and take a bump when it mattered, because that's always been my philosophy, is make your bumps count and make your words count. And managers are still something that I think WWE could use more of, but the difficulty now in WWE is that you can't put a manager of just wrestling heritage into a prominent position anymore in top drawing situations if your name is not Paul Heyman. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, Pat McAfee is in is in Randy Orton's corner, which nobody asked for or needed. But that's the kind of profile of a name that TKO, not necessarily WWE, but TKO is looking for in a corner man. It's really hard now, unless you're wrestling yourself, to just be a manager and to get managerial heat and to get managerial comeuppance. And it's something that Paul Heyman has practically just completely cornered the market on. And it's a tough situation, I think, because managers could do a lot of these guys some good who really cannot talk, especially in the era where the athleticism is at an all-time high and the charisma is at an all-time low. And this is, yes, they've used managers to good effect, but they've really only used the one that they were already using. Now, I will give MVP credit. He transitioned into that role quite nicely. I wish that there were other wrestlers who could have made that position in one way or another. You know, Don Callis, and here's the interesting thing about this, because in 2016 context, there was no AEW. It was WWE, and I mentioned this in the video, there was WWE, and then the drop-off of 2016, and again, this was pre-final deletion, 2016 TNA and 2016 Ring of Honor, which was actually doing pretty good, but were not even in the stratosphere. They were not even in the solar system of WWE, and still aren't, by the way, and that's partially because TNA is working with WWE now, even though they're doing better business than they have in a long time, partially on that basis. And Ring of Honor is owned by Tony Khan, and they are zombified. They're beyond zombified. We were talking about D&D before. Tony Khan is basically just a wrestling necromancer who is bringing these people and reviving them from the dead to be seen once a year on TV that nobody pays attention to if you stumble into the dark cave. And that's basically it. But I don't, because Tony has a lot of power, but he doesn't really use much of it. But, well, not the brain capacity. But in any case, this was not meant to be a knock on Tony Khan. But the point is, AEW being around, you know, this originally was 5 easy fixes for WWE. I don't think I could translate this type of list to an AEW, and I'll get more to that in a second. Because, yeah, they have managers, but they have so many fucking managers that nobody matters. I like Stokely Hathaway, and ironically enough, I mentioned FTR in that video 10 years ago, and I like Stokely Hathaway even though he's kind of a gimmick, but at the same point, they have like too many managers to where everybody's lost in the shuffle. There's 48,000 members of the Don Callis family. One of them matters, maybe two. If Takeshita's part of it or not, I don't know. I don't pay enough attention, and even the people who do pay attention seem to not know for sure. So it's difficult to translate what I was trying to say about WWE to WWE in 2026, let alone other companies around now, because it's two different worlds. But that was point number one, and I think that it stands that WWE could use some more quality managers. I won't lie to you there. They could use some more quality managers. The problem is they're going to want all of them, or at least TKO will, are going to want all of them to be celebrities, and that's the opposite of what I was talking about. Wrestling needs homegrown managers. Homegrown managers who can be stars and can get over stars. Paul Heyman can do it, although he has his share of duds, and I won't lie to you, the Vision all in all was a dud for Paul Heyman. It really was, and I know he's still in control of it, but considering what this mishmash of a horrific build WrestleMania 42 has been, I have to call the Vision maybe the worst failure of Paul Heyman's WWE managing career, with the exception of maybe Rybacksel, because that was done as a clutching at straws kind of moment, like it's either this or nothing for these two. And Paul Heyman did what he could, but you could tell even his heart wasn't in it, you know? It's like, I don't know. But in any case, WWE could still use more managers, but the wrestling business as a whole needs to prioritize training managers of quality. And because I don't trust the people training people now, I don't think we can get quality managers anymore. I think it's hard to home grow wrestling managers. It's hard to home grow wrestling stars, period, now, because of the way that things go. And that leads to the second point that I made on that podcast, which was less spots, more context. And I was basically saying this to the wrestlers, and ironically enough, in 2016, I clapped on the Young Bucks, and I mentioned, look at the Young Bucks, they're spot monkeys. That's a direct quote. And here we are in 2026, where they have had quite literally thousands of the exact same match they were having in 2016. And now that virus has spread everywhere. And it has now gotten so hard to invest in anybody. And the athleticism is great. And I know that there is a niche audience that just wants to see the flippy shit. And that's great. And I'm happy that you can get a lot of that all the time. Sincerely, I enjoy that you can scratch that itch. But for me, WWE is in an interesting spot now because it's almost... I don't want to say that it's the opposite problem because that's not true. It's the same problem, but now you've slowed all of that down to the point where it's excruciating. And what I mean by that is you are getting lots of spots in WWE, and sometimes they matter and sometimes they don't. This Intercontinental 6-man ladder match that we're about to get, that's going to be one of those matches there. The spots are not going to matter except for to make all of the... all the fans go, yay, I love flippy stuff, they look gnarly. And I'm one of those people, but, getting wrestling fans to clap like seals is not a hard thing to do for spots. And it doesn't help the overall vibe and feeling of the show. But in WWE now, I won't fight that. Because I don't think that's the problem. I think because they have now elongated everything and dragged everything out for so long to where it used to be 100 miles an hour and now it is at like 25, like 0.25 speed. Like speed you can only use on YouTube Premium speed. And I just, it's to the point where I'm going to be watching WrestleMania at 1.5 speed. I really debated it this time because I've been watching all the B shows. I watched the Rumble at 1.5 speed and I was like, but this is WrestleMania. This is WrestleMania. Am I going to do that for that? And ultimately, yeah, because there's going to be 8 to 10 hours of wrestling I'm going to have to ingest over the course of 2 days to then regurgitate in a 5-hour slog of a podcast regurgitation here on this for episode 199 and 200. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need to move the show along. Which means I got to move past all the pyro, the 12-minute entrances, the 2.5-minute in-ring intros with Alicia finger in the light socket Taylor, or what's his name? Mark Nash. Mark, I'm constantly crying Nash. And I just, all I want is balance. And at one point we were getting so little wrestling and so much goo-ga. And now it's even worse. I mean, we're going to get wrestling on WrestleMania. They're going to save the matches for that, but it's so misbalanced. I want to have some quality wrestling matches for sure. But I want there to be the idea that quality wrestling matches do not have to go a third of an hour. They don't even have to go a quarter of an hour. Some matches are perfectly fine being 9 minutes. One of my favorite matches ever, and it's grown on me over the years more and more, is Rey Mysterio and Kurt Angle at SummerSlam 2002. 9 minutes, and it was perfect. It got Rey over exactly the way that they needed him to. Kurt Angle still looked like a bastard. It was exactly what they needed for both of those guys. It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. I love that match so much, and it didn't need to go for forever. And everything in WWE, the matches, the angles, the emoting, the entrances, the pyro, the exits, the commercials, go forever. And it's instead of less spots and more context, I would just say less, period. Because we get some decent wrestling on WWE nowadays. We do. And it's not the get up and do this and get up and do that. That is AEW's problem. And that is the backbone of AEW's problem. So my second point really more applies now to everything that AEW does. And by the way, I'm not going to mention names, but somebody mentioned to me the other day this match between Kenny Omega and MJF. And I'm going to tell you, I saw the finish of that match and knew that I did not need to see a lick of the rest of it. Because MJF in this match with Kenny Omega, after taking an avalanche one-winged angel, and that not doing it tombstoned Kenny Omega through a table on the outside like he does every single motherfucking match, picks him up in 0.2 seconds and puts him in for a heat seeker, doesn't cover him. His neck might be broken, but no, let's continue to break it as if the heat seeker mattered. 1, 2, 3, and MJF retains. I don't care how long they went. I don't care how much they did. I don't care how much swearing MJF did in front of the camera because he is desperate for attention. He is desperate to not be the less famous Miz that everybody now sees him as, including me. And it kills me to say that, but MJF did it to himself. And that match, I don't care how good it was, because it was a 4-hour show, first of all, so it's not like all of the matches beforehand didn't do every move that has ever been conceived to mankind before that match started. I bet you saw a tombstone that night before that match. I guarantee, without even seeing the show, I guarantee you somebody else did a tombstone pile driver. I promise you, I would almost put money on it. I would almost put money on the fact that somebody else earlier in the night did a tombstone. So this second point, that one is reserved for AEW and AEW alone. Number 3, and this one is across the board. This one is across the board. I think this one is a blanket one. Justify what you're doing. Justify the moves you're doing. Justify the story you're telling. I made a great comparison in that first podcast because I had just taken an improv class and there were 2 parts of improv. I mentioned that at the D&D part. There are 2 keys to improv that I learned from an improv teacher in college. 2 questions you got to ask when you're establishing canon of any sort. 1, if that is true, why is it true? And number 2, if that is true, what else is true? And a lot of that is really only being done by CM Punk and Roman Reigns. And yeah, it's gotten much better. To be fair, the logic behind things has gotten much better when TKO isn't fucking it all up, and I will give them credit for that. However, because the show drags so painfully and so slowly, and you just know everything's just plodding along, it doesn't matter how much sense it makes anymore. And the problem is, half the time it does, half the time it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because they give up on shit. You know, let's be honest about this. John Cena's retirement run was a colossal failure. Did it draw money? Of course it did. They could have had him come out there and stand silent every day on that tour, and it would have drawn buckets. Not saying that it wouldn't. But creatively speaking, from The Rock poisoning it, and then Travis Scott being shoehorned in by TKO fucking it all up, and then John Cena basically going, I was lied to. I'm a babyface now. Let's go back to what we should have done. And then going to the end and then smiling with... They are trying to justify these stories, but the format makes it very difficult to digest. And I think that's more the issue with WWE. It's less about having some continuity as to why people are fighting. They've done a great job of that with Roman Reigns and CM Punk. And a lot of that is because of those two. You know, there's a lot more creative license, and this was something I said that Vince needed to do 10 years ago that has happened a little bit more, is that wrestlers are getting a chance to be them. You know, which is leading to a lot of sink or swim moments for people, but there is also a lot of nonsensical pushing and de-pushing, you know? There's a lot of stop and start with WWE, and that's the difficult thing. Like, they throw you the line of something that could be good, and I think back to what Otis and Chad Gable could have been, and I'm sad they never pulled through with it. And it's amazing for those of you who are listening in 2020, when I was like anti-Otis in every way, they did Otis dirty, man. They did Otis wicked dirty. Because I swear there was something they could have done with him and Chad Gable had they really paid attention to it. Everything with Chad Cable could have been different. Even this El Grande Americano gimmick, which I thought was bad, but at least it made sense for what he was doing with the Luchadors and AAA and WWE buying AAA. Like, that made sense. But what they've done with it afterwards and making the 3 Americanos, and apparently Mexico is eating it up, but I am not. But what they're doing at least is they're trying to justify the stories. They're trying to justify why things are happening, and it's gotten better, but it still needs a lot of work. But I don't know how much of that is that Triple H and the Brain Trust have just completely run out of ideas. I don't know how much of that is that TKO is influencing things to such a degree that there may not be the control over the creative that we might surmise Triple H actually has. And then there's the additional dimension of the idea that Ari Emanuel is still kind of in cahoots with Vince McMahon in terms of still wanting to get his opinion from time to time, as Triple H revealed on the Cody Rhodes podcast. And that's a whole can of worms in and of itself that I'm dreading we're going to have to open at WrestleMania. I'm hoping I am wrong about such things, but I'm afraid that we are going to have to open that can at WrestleMania, but that's going to be a can that will be opened. The Vince McMahon can will be opened, because I'm now of the opinion that Vince never really left, and I don't know how much influence he does or does not have to this day. So, but that's a different conversation for another time. Number 4 on that list was acknowledging the world. And to WWE's credit, they have done this a lot. They have really opened their horizons to this. And not only just in the fact that they've bought a whole bunch of companies again, and they basically did a double territory acquisition because they've planted their roots in Europe, and they've got AAA now that they're working with, and they've got a partnership with TNA, and they've got, they've dipped their toes into a lot of other feelers in addition to really embellishing what NXT has been. They've done a really good job of acknowledging the world around them. And I think it has not hurt the wrestling business as a whole. Them buying all of these places has maybe hurt the wrestling business as a whole, but ultimately, them expanding beyond, we are the only wrestling company, there's no other wrestling company in the world except for us. They've at least changed that a little. And they've opened their horizons to that. The problem is they didn't know where to close the floodgates, and now there's advertising all over the mat and over the tables. And I've seen so many photos, by the way. I just have to say, there's one benefit to the internet wrestling community, and that's the memes sometimes. Because I've seen so many Finn Balor as the Demon, and on the paint has been like dude wipes or the Slim Jim logo, like he's gonna come out all logoed up as the Demon, and that tickles me. It just tickles me. But in any case, them acknowledging the world has been a big part of why wrestling, I do think, is, I don't want to say healthier than it was, but it has not hurt things. It is definitely not hurt things, although it has kind of tainted New Japan programming to be in cahoots with AEW as much, but I don't know what the relationship between those entities is now either, because AEW's been around a while, and I know there is some level of talent exchange, and they still do Forbidden Door, but in any case, then we have the last piece, which was number 5. And this one is fascinating to me, because in no certain terms, I basically said that WWE needs to stop paying attention to the marks and stop paying attention to the hardcore internet wrestling community fans who have very interesting views of the way the wrestling should be run without any of the context. And the irony here is that I still believe this. I've actually have become far more critical of the internet wrestling community. One of the things that I did in that 10 years ago was basically say that I'm a part of that. And at that time, I was a part of Discus Boards, and I am no longer a part of that. Basically my only wrestling internet involvement is talking to Joshua and Skylar on this program. So does that technically make me a part of a community involving wrestling that is on the internet? Sure. But I will be damned if I call myself a member of the internet wrestling community. I am not one of the vermin on Twitter. I am not a JD from New York. I am not one of these smut peddlers, these turd burglars who go in and just reap the shit, especially with stuff that's not true. And I didn't mean to go into this rant, but I gotta go into a side tangent rant. I cannot fucking stand news sites that go, Jim Cornette said this about this, and goes and just quotes a podcast that anyone can view that they've already released on YouTube. Like, stop shilling for content, or your live's that fucking bankrupt. You are not a real news site. You are not real news. You are going, did you see what Jim Cornette said about this? At best, you are a big-haired gossip girl at a hair salon. Stop this. Stop your channel, cease your investigations, and fuck off. Because it's not worth it. What is the point of doing that? And it's very rare that you hear us on this program talk about, like, okay, we'll talk about what Cody said on a podcast with Triple H, sure, as far as it inciting a discussion about wrestling as a whole, but we're not sitting there going, oh, this is gossip and this is what I think about it, because it's just, we're not doing that saying that we're a news site. You know, and I'm not trying to target, we're not news. We do the wrestling news just to kind of update you based on things we see and whether there's some discussion that Skylar and I or Joshua and I or the combination of the three of us want to make. But we're not purporting ourselves as a fact-based news center for wrestling the way that something like again, I'm making this up. This could be a real, actual wrestling news site. I don't know. But let's say a Wrestling News Co.org YouTube channel that goes, Jim Cornette outraged over blah, 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 blah. But, like, just give them the link to Cornette. Like, stop shilling for pennies on the dollar. That's the thing. You're not even getting paid quality money by YouTube to do that. Then it's like people scalping Pokemon cards. It's like you could be learning how to play piano, but no, you're instead hunting for clickbait articles to get $3 put into your account so that you could spend it on an amp. Not an amp like a music amp, like an energy drink amp at the Citco and a crappy piece of pizza. And that's your getting out for the day. That's your out and touching grass is going to a gas station for an energy drink and a hot dog that's been on a roller for 6.5 hours. Maybe a day has gone by and that thing's still on that rack. Anyway, I'm sorry, I did not mean to go on that tangent, but ignoring the marks, I 100% get behind. And this is something that I think both AEW and WWE are actually worse off now than they were before. I mean, AEW didn't exist then, but that's all AEW has ever done. And everybody's gotten to see the results of what exclusively catering to the marks in the IWC. You've seen the result. It hasn't been more attendance. It hasn't been more ticket sales. And the only thing that's helping AEW right now is that WWE's vibes have shat the bed prolifically. But it's not because of AEW's direction or their storytelling or they're catering to the wrestling fans like they hear them, which they might, but they listen too much. Because Tony is one. And on WWE's side, I think they've dipped their toes into that pool a little too much. And they've tried to fuse it in with WWE Unreal, but they've got Danhausen there cursing people. You know, which I understand is for the kids. Again, I don't really mind Danhausen. You know, I'm not a big fan of him being a wrestler. Love for him to just be a personality and then maybe a manager for somebody. But there has been a caterage to that niche audience and what AEW has been doing for a while now with WWE. And I mentioned this kind of in this situation too, and I want to go back to number 4. I mentioned acknowledging the world. One thing WWE doesn't do, or they still do, that drives me insane is giving bad names to new wrestlers. I know Royce Keys is a name that he chose that has emotional significance for him, but it's still a crap name. I'm sorry. Powerhouse Hobbs fits so much better, but they got to trademark everything and blah, blah, blah. But rounding out this whole idea, could I make a 5 easy fixes for WWE video like this 10 years from now? No. Mainly because the problems are too large. I think they're too deep. And now they have got the added dimension of having TKO as an external influence. When Vince had unilateral control, this was stuff that was mostly on Vince's shoulders to change. Now, the machine is almost too big for there to be any easy fixes of any description. You can make an easy fixes for an AEW, but that would be pointless because they just refuse to listen. Every wrestler and veteran that's ever tried to be an agent for them has ultimately either given up or said the same thing of, they don't listen. Tony's going to do what Tony wants to do. And if he talks to old timers, it's basically just to say, look at all the shit I'm going to do. And his number one booker is Dave Meltzer. And so long as that's the case, that cause is completely lost. And there's no point in making a 5 easy fixes video for AEW, because if they started to do any of those things, they could jump ahead so much, but they have actively demonstrated over 6 years that they want to do the exact opposite of that. And so the wrestling world right now, it's like there's no easy fix for this. WWE is in a very intriguing position where TKO and WWE are kind of at odds. I wouldn't be surprised if Triple H loses his job unjustly or otherwise, even though the show's become rapidly boring and it's not on his shoulders. But with all the celebrity involvement, I wouldn't be surprised if Triple H is out, somebody like The Rock or Vince or Brian Gewirtz is put in, and things get worse. I don't see WWE improving over the next several, even if WrestleMania is good. Given what's coming up for WrestleMania 43 and Saudi Mania, or whether they change that or not, the trajectory of WWE is not good right now. Because the stories have no weight. They've been frantically, desperately trying to sell tickets for running back a venue they shouldn't have run back to begin with, because they wanted more ticket sales. And it's basic law of diminishing returns. I don't know how TKO could have been stupid enough to go, we didn't get good ticket sales the first time, let's try again. Consecutive years. No, that's not how wrestling works. And I'm afraid that people who don't know wrestling are ruining wrestling on WWE's part. And somebody who doesn't know wrestling on the other channel is ruining wrestling by doing every bad habit humanly possible and ignoring every good habit that possibly could be done on that show. So it's hard. It's hard for me to care when WWE is boring me to tears and AEW is boring me to tears for the exact opposite set of problems, and there's no middle ground. We're going to try TNA. We're going to do this stuff. I mentioned it before. We're going to be, after WrestleMania, we're going to be doing company check-ins. I want to see MLW. I want to see what AAA looks like. I want to see a New Japan show. I want to see what Britain's doing if I can find something there. Fuck it, I'll watch a JCW show. Let's go see what Russo's up to with the Clowns, the NWA. Let's check everybody else out, because I don't know if there is a place right now for my passion with wrestling, and I couldn't do, after 10 years and seeing how much the landscape of WWE has changed, how much these fixes still need application in the wrestling business, but how much worse the state of the business in the things that I had a problem with has gotten. Some of it's improved, some of it hasn't. But I don't know if there really is an answer for any of this. There is no easy fix anymore. It was all so simple. It was all so simple back in 2016, before things got muddied up with Goldberg and the pandemic and Vince's brain rot and Triple H taking over and AEW. It was just a different world. It was just a different world. And there's only so much that can be said about it. But folks, there is more to be said because we are going to review the entirety, day 1 and day 2 of WrestleMania 42 next time on the program this Friday. You are going to get the exclusive, comprehensive breakdown by yours truly, your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty. Every match, the build up to it as far as I have seen it or cared to have seen it, whether I'm going to watch it or skip it, my predictions for who's winning what, and that will close out this episode. We'll be right back right after this.